direct and indirect speech. You know, it's one of those topics that can completely trip up even the most diligent language learners. But hey, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are absolutely transforming this grammar hurdle into a really simple, step-by-step journey. Honestly, there's going to be no more second guessing during your exams or when you're writing. By the end of this guide, you are going to have a complete, foolproof playbook for mastering these transformations effortlessly. So, let's jump right in. Okay, let's wrap our heads around this by comparing a direct, face-to-face conversation with an indirect one. Think of direct speech as looking someone right in the eyes and hearing their exact, literal words. It's immediate, it's precise. Indirect speech, on the other hand, well, that's more like passing a message along to a third person over a phone call. You aren't acting like a tape recorder just playing back the audio. Instead, you're conveying the core message in your own words. It's basically the difference between someone saying, "I am hungry," and you telling someone else later, "He said that he was hungry."
We've got a super clear 6-step roadmap for today. We'll cover direct and indirect speech, reporting and reported speech, the main rules for changing tense, time, place, and pronouns, the magic 1, 2, 3/SON formula, and finally, rules for connecting sentences. Having this kind of structured approach means you really won't struggle with narration questions ever again.
All right, Section 1, Direct and Indirect Speech. Let's start building our playbook with this core concept. This example right here brilliantly illustrates our first major shift. Think about the direct quote. He said, "I am going to Mumbai." The exact words are totally preserved inside those quotation marks. But when we drop the exactness for an indirect report, it becomes, "He said that he was going to Mumbai." Notice what happens. The quotation marks completely vanish, the pronoun shifts from I to he, and the tense actually steps backward from am to was. Those exact words are essentially smoothed out into an indirect reported message. Moving into Section 2, Reporting and Reported Speech. Before we start applying all the rules, we really need to understand our mechanical parts. You can't fix an engine if you don't know the names of the parts, right? In narration, every sentence is basically broken into two distinct halves. The crucial thing here is distinguishing the reporting verb from the reported speech. The reporting verb lives outside the quotes. It's what tells us who is speaking and how, like Ram said or she asks. The reported speech, though, is the actual message trapped inside those inverted commas, the literal words that left the speaker's mouth, something like, "Will you give me your pen?" When we switch to indirect speech, our main job is really just breaking down the wall between these two parts. Which brings us to Section 3, Main Rules for Changing Tense. Now that we know the parts, here is our first big transformation key. Once you remove those quotation marks, the timeline of the entire sentence usually has to step into the past. Look at how systematically every present tense steps back into its past tense equivalent. If the original speaker used the present indefinite, your indirect report simply drops back to the past indefinite. Present continuous, that becomes past continuous. And for the future tense, it's actually pretty elegant. Will gracefully shifts to would, and shall becomes should. It's just this highly logical mirroring effect where you are stepping exactly one pace backward in time. But right alongside tenses, we also have to transform specific time and place words. I mean, think about it. If your friend says, "I am leaving today," and you report that to someone else 3 days later, saying today would be incredibly confusing. So, to reflect that the conversation is no longer happening in the present moment, today becomes that day. This shifts to that. Here moves to there. And tomorrow becomes the next day. It's all about adjusting the perspective of the timeline so the story makes sense.
Now, beware of the exceptions. The English language absolutely loves throwing a curveball. If you spot a universal truth, something like, the moon moves round the sun, you absolutely do not change the tense. And why is that? Well, because the moon is still moving around the sun right now. It would make literally no sense to say the moon moved around the sun, as if it just decided to stop one day. That exact same rule applies to established historical facts. Plus, if your reporting verb on the outside is in the present or future tense, like he says, the tense inside the quotes completely freezes. No change at all.
All right, Section 4. Time, place, and pronouns. We've conquered time. Now we need to conquer identity. Pronouns are honestly often the trickiest part of this whole journey. Words like I, we, and you are entirely relative depending on who is currently speaking. When you report a conversation, you're usually stepping out of that first person and second person perspective and acting as a third-party narrator. Because of that, I and you have to shift dynamically depending on who is actually telling the story and who they happen to be talking about. That leads us perfectly to Section 5, the magic 1-2-3/SOWN formula. If you've ever found yourself confused about whether you becomes he, she, or I, you are going to love this. To conquer these pronoun shifts effortlessly, we're going to use an incredibly effective memory hook. The 1-2-3 over SON formula is the ultimate cheat code you will latch onto for your exams. It's elegant, it's simple, and it solves 100% of your pronoun problems. Let's break down exactly how this works. The numbers 1, 2, and 3 represent the first, second, and third person pronouns inside the quote. The letters S, O, and N represent subject, object, and no change. Okay, so if you see a first person pronoun like I, it matches the subject of the reporting verb. A second-person pronoun like you matches the object, the person being spoken to. And for a third-person pronoun like he or she, well, N stands for no change. You just leave it exactly as it is. It's a totally foolproof system. Finally, Section 6, Rules for Connecting Sentences. For our final step, once we rip away those quotation marks, we're basically left with two broken halves of a sentence. We need the right glue to stitch the whole thing back together, and that glue changes depending on the type of sentence trapped inside the quotes. If it's a standard assertive statement, you connect the halves with the word that. If it's an interrogative, like a yes-no question, you use if or whether. But if the question starts with a WH word, like why or where, that word itself actually becomes your connector. And finally, if the sentence is an imperative, order, or request, you simply use to or not to. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final challenge. Can you apply our step-by-step playbook to transform this exact question, why are you late today, right now in your mind? Let's trace the clues really quickly. Y is your connector. The SON formula shifts you to I, and today steps back in time to that day. Do you have the final sentence? The real question, though, is how will you indirectly report what you learned today to a friend? Keep practicing those transformations, and I'll see you in the next explainer.